Great. So welcome.
Hello.
Welcome and thank you for joining us. Apologies for the technical difficulties. Yeah, I'm Candice, Allison. I'm the director at the Bag Factory in Johannesburg. And I'm happy to open the discussion today for the first artist Q&A that we're having as part of the Bag Factory's experiment into online virtual exhibitions, which we're imagining as the Covert Bioscope. So I'm just going to read very short biographies so everyone knows who is here. We're joined by Phumulani Ntuli, who holds a Master's in Fine Art from ECAV in Switzerland, and he's exhibited at the Congo Biennale in 2019, the Kampala Biennale, the Bone Performance Festival in Switzerland, and he's also performed in the 2016 ACT Festival, which was in Geneva, Basel, and Sierre in Switzerland. Olivia Botha, who studied fine art at Michaelis School of Art in Cape Town, and she was the winner of the 2018 Cassio Wells Award. She's exhibited at SNAC Johannesburg and the National Gallery of Zimbabwe in Harare and Bulawayo. Then we've got Neville Starling, who's a self-taught artist from Bulawayo in Zimbabwe, who represented Zimbabwe at the 2019 Venice Biennale and has exhibited at the National Gallery of Zimbabwe in Bulawayo and Harare, the Africa Center in New York, and was the runner-up in the first Zimbabwean PPC Imaginarium Awards in 2018. Phumulani, I think you also won a PPC Imaginarium Award for one of your videos. Okay. So I hope that everyone who's joined has watched the videos, which we posted onto our website. If you haven't, then I've got some stills. I'll share my screen so that you can see stills from the videos as we're sort of talking through it. Some house rules. I think it's good to keep your audio muted except for the artists while they're talking, and then when you have a question, please raise your hand and then unmute your microphone so that we can hear you. If you have difficulty, then you can send a message through the meeting and I can help you. I'm the administrator of the group. So I'm going to just start by asking each of the artists a question, and then I have a question for all three of you to answer, and then we'll open the floor to the audience. So Phumulani, to me, your work obviously speaks to archives as mechanisms for the colonial, post-colonial state for maintaining the status quo. And the video is interspersed throughout with a computer voice warning that a threat has been detected, which I told you I first thought was from 2001, A Space Oddity, but when I Googled it, it just kept coming up that this is a typical spyware warning. Then we encounter a character in the video who looks like a glitch in the present day system. And the closing line of the video is a woman saying that we are the audience, we are watching. So I wanted you to just speak about who or what you perceive as the threat. If you're alluding to ideas of surveillance, who is watching and who is being watched? Oh, we still can't hear you, Phumulani. Hold on. I've unmuted you. Okay, there we go. You're good.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yes, I was saying, for me, of course, maybe it'd be interesting to like break the question in like several parts, but I hope I'll answer it as we kind of go as well, if I leave some things out. Yeah, of course, the video, it's like, well, the film is like an experimental film, an essay film. I was interested in the idea of an essay in a film, as in like writing with the lens, writing with the camera medium, At the same time, the writing system itself also puts you in a kind of a form of a sequence, which also speaks in relation to how the images unfold in relation to the other. So as, for example, the voiceover has a specific kind of like fragmentation of the text. So the text is like broken in parts to link all the sequence of the videos in place. Yeah, the film speaks about like the ideas of surveillance. Of course, like we're thinking about surveillance within the post-colonial situations of monitoring bodies in space, or bodies within a specific geographical location. So I was interested in the idea of surveillance. Of course, I've been interested in it in relation to investigating the ideas of archives, especially with the photographic medium. For example, photography is kind of an important form of evidence to justify or to give credibility about a specific event, or that something took place. When an image is taken of someone or of people, it gives an impression that like something happened. So I'm interested in the idea of like a photographic image as like a frame that freezes time. Hence, also in the video, you see this character whose image has been cropped out. Of course, like cropping or kind of cutting itself within a photographic medium as a frame that locks one particular subject, and also as a frame that kind of, you know, positions one within a specific form of evidence. So I was interested in those ideas of seeing this character, his image taken out of like the internet space into a filmic device, so that the character can move, can perform, can speak, you know. So it is like an inference around the ideas of tracing an image, like certain marks that the image leaves when it is downloaded. And of course, these metadata or these the information that you not necessarily know when you look at a specific image. So this is what kind of encompasses the film itself. In relation to the voiceover, or like some of the threat is detected, like the spyware clip also like refers to, of course, like, you know, like we can think of a computer system as a body somehow, you know, like as a body, like a specific lens within a computer, the sound, you know, or the camera itself, you know, like as just as it kind of invites like people to kind of, you know, step in within something. So the threats is like also within archive images within the internet space or the digital space, and how they kind of reinforces themselves to like be visible, to be seen. So the idea of a photographic image disappearing out of the internet space or out of the public realm also, for me, addresses those ideas. It's kind of a form of a threat. It's kind of hacking itself into the system that already forces itself to isolate that image, you know. So it's kind of a consistent reminder as well. Like as soon as we see these images, as soon as they bombard us, for example, if you step into I don't know, like whatever, you know, the cookies in any kind of website, of course, like your trace is kind of left there. So an internet server can like trace you back the steps that you've taken from coming to the website. That's why, for example, if you like, I mean, of course, we all know this. You search for shoes. Now you see like shoes in, you know, in your timeline on Facebook and everything else, you know, that kind of thing. Or if you search about like a specific image, those images kind of follow you somehow. So I'm interested in the persistence of certain images or certain traces or marks that are left within images, sound, as we engage it, you know. Yeah, so this is what I can say at this very point.
Yeah. So we'll come back to that in a bit, but I'm just going to ask Olivia. So you often deal with notions of silence, not being able to speak, not being heard, or sometimes just being misunderstood. And obviously we have 11 official languages in South Africa and many more unofficial ones. And you also teach English online when you're not making art. So can you speak about language, maybe text as well, and how it influences your practice?
Yeah, sure. I was actually thinking about it a little bit earlier, and I realized that from quite a young or early age, I've always been drawn to kind of writing in a way that's not necessarily just kind of, this is what happened today, and like very kind of blatant explanations. I'm quite drawn to this idea that's it's more elusive and it's more open, and I don't really want to call it a poem because I don't consider myself a poet, but it's kind of like poem-like in a sense, and I'm also, I think it's quite nice to just kind of play in that realm as well. It almost comes to me without having to think too much about it. It just is something that I have to then write down, and then the one would follow the next, and it would kind of somehow reinforce, I guess, a narrative of some sorts. Might not always make complete sense, and that, I guess, is part of it. And that's also part of this idea, the broader scope of the inability to speak, or the inability to listen or communicate, be it via text or face to face, and also, of course, having two languages, being being able to speak two languages, and kind of being able to almost place yourself into each of those realms, the cultural kind of relations. And I was just also thinking that, of course, each language has got that, and it gets lost in translation. And of course, at this point in time, English will be the kind of the mediator, right, in terms of translating for a lot of people, I guess. And specifically also, teaching online, that's exactly the point of it, right? It's that people want to be able to communicate with each other. But of course, a lot gets lost in that translation. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I want to say with that. So I guess you can, if you watch the video, you'll hear again this poem being recited, mostly in English, and then a little bit of Afrikaans. I mean, it's just how it kind of happened. Again, it wasn't a very overtly kind of specific, this is why I'm doing it. It's very much intuition, which is a lot of my practice, which I'm trying to kind of get back into. I think also studying, at university, which has all these amazing advantages, but it's unfortunate that this idea of intuition doesn't always get as much attention as I think it should. So I'm trying to kind of work with my medium, and words or silence is part of that.
Right. So, Neville, I'm already seeing things like between everyone's work, while it's completely different, this idea of text and language, and I mean, even the use of images, Phumulani and archives could also be completely lost in translation, obviously. But Neville, your work kind of sits in between the two. Looking at memory and forgetting, but your video felt to me more like a immersive sound experience, almost of this increasing storm of sounds that I couldn't figure out, accompanied by an abstract, quite banal moving image. And as the sound got louder, the image became less clear to see. So I'm curious if you feel that maybe for you, does sound have more connection to memory than imagery?
Well, I'm very interested in the way that, so firstly, let me just say that the way I think of memory is also the way that we've learned to be in the world. And a lot of my work deals with how we are in the world and how we've been taught to be in the world. And all of this comes from experience. And the world is a sensuous place. And I think sound is a very important, I mean, sound, you don't really, like if you're in a room, you perceive the sound first before you see it. So I think it's quite primal. And I think like perception and memory is you know, in terms of experience, it's not objective, and it's not, you know, it's very individual. And I think that the entire experience is very important. And if we think of memory this way, then we can pick apart this idea of a photograph as a memory, because it lacks time, it lacks sound, it lacks smell, and it kind of creates a finality where it can't grow from that exact image. And I think we're designed to forget in order to grow. And what I did with the video is I wanted to create this kind of dichotomy between the calmness of what we're seeing and that chaos within us, to talk about this idea of normalization versus, you know, this kind of upheaval which needs to happen with change, which is why I used the idea of panic. So the audio is of me blowing into a brown paper bag, and then it increases and increases. And it's also a kind of comment on where is this point where we stop normalizing stuff and begin to actually take act. And there's, within the video, there's spatial references like the clouds. You can't see, you know, there's no reference points to put you in place somewhere. It's just, you've made it into this normalized state. And now, you know, what does it take to change us?
Yeah. So what I felt, I mean, which is a question for all three of you, and I mean, this will also extend to Malibona and Helena, whose videos we'll be showing next week, is a common interest in using layering and collage as well in your works, which Phumulani, it moves fluidly from video to two-dimensional collages on canvas and paper and then back again. And also this layering of archives with footage you've shot and sort of sound bites and recordings of people, so things you found and things that you've also created. So this combination of like, yeah, history and present, and then this fiction that comes out of it, out of your layering. Olivia, you also make collage works on paper, and then you use elements of your video works in your installations, which you then video again and turn into this video of video of stuff and more video. And then Neville, in your case, this comes through as a layering of images, chemicals, light, and sound. So I wonder if you could each talk about that, and then I'm going to share my screen to show some images of your work while you're speaking. So maybe Phumulani, if you want to start, and you just
maybe I can speak about the idea of collage. I think for me, like a way of collaging or a montage kind of process, they can be different in relations to like filmic medium. I think these images are not really speaks to these works, so I prefer not to show them.
These are quite old ones, yeah. This is I wanted to show the one that you did on Instagram yesterday, which you posted, but it wasn't.
Okay.
We tested earlier; it wasn't working. But it was a collage that you've made that you then animated back into a video, and then these are just some stills from.
Yeah, because I think the video itself is like too loaded with like material, like not like actually. It's more like a slide as well. So I feel like the idea of collaging for me, I think it's not really. I think it's more influenced by the Black Film and Audio Collective. It's a UK based collective with Jonah Comfra. You know, so the way they've used like the idea of a montage was to necessarily like speak to the status quo of England within a particular context. So they were heavily using archive. And obviously the references come from like Russian montage kind of ways of filming. Filmmakers like Eisenstein. Also, it's also informed by the Senegalese, Senegalese filmmaker. So like to collage, for me at least, it's just to disrupt an image. And at the same time, I'm aware that there is a sense of violence in the cutting of the image that maybe a photographer or a researcher could like position within, you know, a colonial undoing of something if you're using colonial framed images, you know, or if it's just contemporary images. So at the same time, for me, it's just an understanding, because of course, like as much as some things are like really nebulous, they're really difficult to touch in a sense. Using the images within the digital space necessarily gives in my own personal like position, like gives a more fluidity on looking at an image than, I mean, it's just a different way of looking and experiencing, you know, which it's like at this contemporary present time, like people make use of the collage process more than we have ever seen, like, you know, Instagram videos and these kind of things. So there is a sense of rapture that like something has to like appear quickly to kind of capture or, you know, entice your senses, or, you know, the visual space. Yeah, that's what I can say at the moment. And in the images that you kind of showing at the moment, because the film was done was kind of presented live in front of an audience. So it's kind of way of imagining fragmentation of an archive images in relation to the present. So in this video mapping, I was showing the archive images within one frame. It was a 4-channel video, and on the other one, it was contemporary images, which I felt spoke to the images and the translation of the images and the context that they used. So it was just like ways to map certain ideas within like a specific geography, which follows maybe ideas of colonial specific framed images. Yeah.
And do you, I mean, there's obviously a difference between doing a performance with the multi-channel video to showing it, you know, you said that it was a much longer video, and then what we've seen is just a slice of that video. So it's a section of it. So how do you think that sort of speaks to this idea of, you know, everything's going virtual now during all these lockdowns?
Yeah, I think it's just ways of kind of engaging different audiences, like because I framed the film within like a performance film in ways that I was trying to avoid when conceiving the project or working with like archive images, to still have them not within like a physical experience of looking at them, but more they are still within the digital space somehow. Like like me cutting an image or cropping it, it's already a deed that has already been done. So it's not necessarily like overdoing. It's just something has already been done. I think it's just like a different way of perceiving it. So what I'm trying to say is that I've tried to kind of avoid, having a physical experience of looking at these images. Hence, like working on the final sequence, the one that is currently shown now, was there is a possibility of like, okay, what are the remnants of a performance or of an occurrence that had happened? So actually having a sequence or recording that something took place. It's already playing with the ideas that I've been using, like reenactment, to reenact a narrative or a story that has already taken place. So it's just an extent of experiencing the film in a kind of different format.
So I'm going to share Olivia. So there's some stills from your video work. And then we've got some of the paper collages, which you showed at Turbine Art Fair last year. And then this is some of the stills from another video work, which includes this video as part of an installation, which you did in your studio. And this gives an idea of sort of how it felt to walk into it. But you've created a whole new video using this installation and different sound as well.
Yeah. It's okay. So I don't know where to start, but I think, I was also kind of considering collage in terms of how it kind of maybe works in terms of my video. And Neville was actually saying to me, well, there's like it's like clips, right? Because it's quite shorter videos compared to, for instance, Phumulani's work. Not all of the videos that I do, but in this specific one. So I guess there's that kind of idea of really just cutting, cutting. And then the video of the installation with the with the first video, that one, that's it's even a faster cut, right? So it's really like a kind of disorientating, maybe, really feeling a sense of I don't know, you really kind of I was hoping that the viewer would kind of feel like they're inside of this installation, because of course installations are very size specific. In this case it was in my studio, and it can travel. Of course it can pop out again and go to a different location, which will give it a different narrative. So it's kind of almost, it's in a way it's a documentation of the installation, including the initial video, and it can also just be seen as a video on its own. So it's kind of like twofold in that sense. And of course, I mean, I love installations. Like it's something that you have to kind of experience, but of course you can't necessarily go to all the installations, so you can't always be there firsthand. And this was, I think, the closest that I could almost give in the terms of the sense that you might have felt. Of course it's my sense, right, my experience of this installation. Trying to think what else did I want to say about that. Again, there is the sound. You can kind of hear the voice, but it's softer, much softer, and it's a bit more kind of the sounds, specifically of ropes at the harbor, which I then also recorded, and that's quite overbearing, I think. And I'm just trying to think what else I wanted to say there. I guess I don't know. I guess also with this, installation, and a lot of my installations, there's this idea of kind of collecting things and picking them up and then trying to make something from that. whether it be in my studio, things that I've already collected, or you know, it might just be, for instance, a string, and then I'm like, I really like this idea of this net, so let's go collect more string. Like really just walk around Fortsburg picking up string, and trying not to, you know, get killed by a car or something. But it's an interesting kind of process, and I've done that quite a few times. Even back in Bulawayo, right? That was also this idea of collecting, and then you know, this process of how are we going to show this video, right? What if we? I think Nev was actually also saying, you know, what if we projected it on this sack, this amazing big sugar sack, which then gives a ghost image behind, right? So that's like the idea of then thinking of how you're going to show the video. Also becomes important, like for instance Phumulani's video, where it becomes a live kind of performance in a way, right? It's a video, but it becomes it's like a second life in a way. So that's quite important, and the same with my collages, right? It's all about things that I can find. It's you know, for instance, the series Oceans and Islands, the title comes from a book which has a similar title, and this collage series and the at sea video, along with the other video and the installation, it kind of connects quite nicely, because it's this idea of, you know, being isolated, right? Being on an island, maybe there's no one else. And then, of course, you have the text coming through again, and how I kind of play with scratching out certain elements and kind of reconstructing what's then seen and what you can read, and how that kind of text will change the way that you look at the image. Yeah, and I guess with these ones, it was, I found a photo album, someone's photo album, which they threw out, right? I found it at a charity shop, and I've been looking for one for a while, and so I was quite excited when I found it, but I also felt strange at this idea of like cutting up someone's pictures, right? And they're really beautiful. The color is amazing in these images, because they're quite, you know, old in a way, not too old, but they're not as new, because we don't really have photo albums anymore. So it's kind of like this interesting idea of reconstructing someone's memory in a sense. Yeah, and then kind of combining that with the images of the book, which was Oceans and Islands, and how does that then create a narrative?
Neville, should we take a look at your other work?
Yeah.
If I can find it. There we go. So these are the stills from your video, and then this is what I understood to be a mixed media kinetic installation with a light source and collodion ambrotypes. And then, so there's two images that I've got from that work, and then there's another image here which I thought really showed this sort of interesting layering.
Yeah. So this image here is a body of work I did when I went back to my childhood home, and I was examining how memories build up, and how once you remove yourself from that space, the influence changes. So the way your memories change. And with the medium itself, it's there's two ways of thinking about how I sort of collage my work. There's one, the medium itself is a Victorian era process. So I'm very interested in amalgamating those times, which is why I often, I don't very often have my work on the wall just as it is, you know, as a normal photograph. There's always some kind of interruption to it. And I think for me personally, it's very important for me to bring that history into a current situation where we can act upon it in a different way than what it would have been then. And then the other aspect of it is the medium itself, which has got it's got maybe 10 or 15 steps to it. And each step you can manipulate it very differently. And some of them are latent, which means they only show up at the end of the image, and some of them are quite immediate. And I think this reflects very much the way that memory works. Yeah. And then the other work, this work here, the very mixed media, uses the same process. But what I was thinking very much about being in space, quite similar to the video shown today. But what's quite interesting about this collage, when thinking about it as a collage, is that it goes through many stages of manipulation as well. One through the light, then through the lens, and then what finally hits the wall, it's a negative. And what it does, it negates certain parts of the light. Whatever's darker, the light doesn't hit. And obviously the whole thing spins around and it occupies the space. And another very interesting thing about light in terms of collage or layers is that you often don't see it until it hits its final sort of destination. And I think sometimes memory can be like this, because we you know, when we recall a memory, memories go through various stages and they change all the time. And I think we always think of a memory when we recall it as a final thing. And we don't we don't think about the various steps that it goes through. And I think it's important to try and figure out how that works. And if we do, it might be a way to kind of change our memory or change our collective memory or forced memory or whatever it may be.
Phumulani, do you think that maybe that is something that you're trying to do in your work, but on like a more of a national memory kind of narrative?
I feel like within the context of South Africa, there is a kind of like a wholesale idea of documents, you know, documentation. Of course, the archive of the pre-colonial and like colonial histories within the context of South Africa, which is not really isolated from other contexts, which kind of felt the same effects, you know, the effects of the media, of a photographic image, the effects of looking, the effects of seeing or hearing, you know. So I feel like as much as the remnants of post-colonial histories already as memories, we can, in my own thinking, as a kind of forensic investigation, is not necessarily isolating the idea that an image already has sound in it, you know. An image doesn't have textures of the weather, you know, as like Neville does with his work, you know, like the texture of the weather can be dissected within a forensic case, you know. I think, holistically, there is a forensic kind of operation that already happens, you know, when we encounter images, when we encounter sound. I think for me, it's just like a way of like using these tools, but within an artistic practice. And obviously the work that I have specifically with this film is, of course, it is more different with my other work within like a studio context. But like for myself was just a way like to search on how to kind of animate, you know, images so that they're not really like fixed or stagnant. So of course the media of the video itself gives a little bit of justice for those things, for the possibility of images to perform, to speak, you know. So yeah, this forensic tools enables us to like play, you know, because there is a sense of play in it, as much as we're dealing with like really serious, of course, in my own context, in my working process, deals with like more serious issues. The idea of play is still there, but in a way that is also more reflective, in a way that is, it's just like also, working with these tools, just to imagine other forms of experience, as I said, like images, I feel like they have sound, they have textures of the weather, probably also a kind of a smell as well, within them. So, but of course, the filmic device, it allows that to happen, or filmic tools, or way of installing or perceiving film.
I mean, what I like how you use the word forensics. There was an installation at the South African Museum a couple of years ago, around the Bushman diorama, and they closed it off and they called it a colonial crime scene. But I feel like all archives are colonial crime scenes, and you have to literally become forensic investigators when you're sifting through this information, because all three of you will know, as filmmakers or artists who use video in your work, that the camera lies, and you can really manipulate what the audience sees just using your camera, your angles, filters, editing, layering. So I think that's an interesting word to use. And as you say, what sound do you include and what sound do you not? Yeah. So I'm just wondering at this point if anybody else would like to raise a question to any of the artists, or if maybe you'd like to ask each other a question. I actually forgot to say at the beginning of this, most of you do know, but all three artists have studio space at the Bag Factory. And I think we're quite lucky at this time that in the past, I don't think there's ever been as many artists working with video who are present at the Bag Factory. And then to see like David's retrospective exhibition, and to see that even someone of his stature and his wise years was using sort of stop motion animation to bring his artworks to life. So I don't know if that's something you ever thought about. Phumulani, you were there when David had
Yes, and like at some point I wanted to work with him, but there was no time. Like I kept on like knocking his door, like, hey, David, can I want to make like an animated video with you somehow. But I think in terms of like I think video work, for example, like is a bit difficult medium to use. It's very, very difficult in a way that it kind of requires like certain tools and like certain capacities, But for me, how I came into video started as like documentation of performances, as I tried to find my way around like performance. So it kind of felt more easy as a way of like showing certain remnants, as I spoke about the idea of reenacting. So I saw it as a possibility to reenact. And obviously there is like that experience of watching a performance and live and like looking at it. It has also different modes of perceptions or reception for the audiences alike. So I think it's an important tool to kind of use in terms of, because I'm always thinking about the fixation of an image as just not really being itself, but like being a broader scheme within other ways of doing, which has been a concern in my work, being interested with the body, the ideas of the body itself. So to kind of see those performances of the body, what the body can do, and to kind of filter or edit certain gestures that an image can, happen. So as I've been doing as well, like since the lockdown, this is like small, animated videos which I've started. Yeah, they're quite exciting. I've been thinking about them for quite some time, but like also researching the processes and the best possible tools to kind of utilize it. And obviously it's a very time consuming process, like of doing one frame at a time. It's just, yeah, at least if, yeah, when you necessarily have, at least 4 people, which is more also a collaborative process than just being yourself. But just, I think through practice or making, allows that confidence to happen, like as things happen over time. So for me, those ones that I've been posting have been a very like, because I was researching for quite some time, maybe like for the past 4 or 3 months. I've been speaking about it with a few people. I spoke to Neville about it as well, and I think maybe to Olivia, I'm not sure. But to Neville, I'm sure I spoke to him about like how I want to kind of think of my studio work as well as like video, so that the works are not really too different. Whereas the other filmic, of course, they're very comical and like cartoony kind of texture to it,
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's just a way to have a certain trace of imagining another audience for the same work. For example, if someone buys it collage, and I can still like exercise it and make certain studies about, with it to make more work, So it's just like a way of going back and forth to previous works and like, borrowing old works to, to kind of see like what can necessarily fit within a body of work, if I may to say. Yeah.
So if you haven't seen those videos, they're on Phumulani's Instagram account, and they're quite short videos as well. Or is it work in progress?
Yeah. Yes. I want to also like I'm thinking of like a longer film. So as I'm making these like studies or exercises, it's just like a way to think about like a 10 minutes kind of clip. So maybe 1 minute each, kind of scene. But to have a more concise or precise, I think it's just like a research process. I don't necessarily like, for now, I'm not really interested in also selling it, or it's just like also a way of getting more audience, which of course, like during the lockdown has allowed me to do that. I don't think I'll be able to like do that if I was in the studio. I was probably not even gonna think about it. So I'm glad that it happened now, and that I'm also like trying to find my way around the process itself. Yeah.
And if we go back to this idea of the body that you were talking about, because Neville, like the body is your tool in your work, it features very, very prominently your own body and the way it moves and the way it works.
Well, for me, it's primarily about looking at the body in space. And one of those images that you showed of that kinetic sculpture is, it takes from Edward Muybridge, who was kind of the guy who created cinema, but it takes more from Muybridge's protege. His name is Etienne Jules Marais. And what I was interested in his work, because he's actually a physiologist, and he used these films to examine how we are in the world. And if you look at these images here, it's kind of, there's no reference point, right? There's just blackness or light, however you look at it, as a positive or a negative. And I use it very often to question my existence in a space, both in a personal context and also in this colonial, post-colonial context as well. And I think especially kind of, I'm really interested in this, in a film, like being a reel of separate images, and how we can use that to minutely examine how we are in the world and how we like, for instance, if you think of walking, your right foot, the movement of your right foot is dictated by the memory of your left foot, and then it goes and goes and goes and goes and goes. Hello?
Sorry, I muted myself.
Yeah.
You've also used your body in your work, and you've told me, or maybe Neville told me, I'm not sure, that one of your videos was shown in
Yeah.
in Zimbabwe, and you're naked in the video, but you're kind of hunched over in a fetal position, and it's filmed from behind. But that the audience was a bit shocked. So maybe you can talk about like patriarchal responses to the naked female body in this context.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually, gosh, that was an old video that I did while I was still studying, and that video, that project actually was with Bernie Sill, and I think it was kind of a pivotal point in my practice where I felt like, you know, it's really the first time I think that I started using video, maybe, and also specifically my own body within a video. I think there's lots of things that you have to consider when you use, you know, other people's bodies in a video, right? You need to kind of consider those elements. And for me, it's just always been, it's my work is first of all quite personal, right? So I kind of have to be there, right? And was also the idea with that project, which was called Swart Skaap, which translates to black sheep, goes back to this kind of family kind of history and being the outcasts and not conforming to the social norm, and going to the family farm on a day when they weren't there, and then you know, kind of filming, like you said, mostly from behind, a little bit of above angle, and throwing ash over my body, right? And that whole kind of element speaks of ritual and prayer and trying to ward off evil spirits or the devil, and which is very closely tied to my maternal grandmother and her kind of religion and her own you know, rituals that she performed. So it was kind of like a way of trying to understand it, but also very actively, you know, being naked was a very concise idea, or it was really considered in terms of, you know, it's very much taboo, not only in this specific sect, this specific religion, which is very conservative, but also, you know, the female body and how it's represented, and specifically nudity, right? The male gaze, all those kind of things that you cannot deny. Like when you see a body, right, you have your prejudice ideas that you place upon them, you know, so that's undeniable. And of course, again, it comes back to how you show the video. So initially, when I made the video, it was kind of part of the performance, right? So I had the performance, which was videoed, and then that video was shown on really just, you know, a cell phone screen, and it was part of like kind of an elaborate sculpture that I was wearing, which I built, and it was attached at the back of my head. So it was all part of this kind of performative work, which was then, you know, documented. So initially when you saw the video, it would have only been the size of a screen, you know, a cell phone screen, considerably small. But the work was shown in Bulawayo during the residency that I did at the National Gallery, and it was kind of an overview of my practice at that point, and that work was and it still is important for me. So I had to kind of include that, right? And I can't remember where it was, but it was a little bit later on in my presentation, and all of a sudden this huge projection falls on the, you know, white wall, and there's my bum, and there's people, and I can just hear, oh my God, Jesus Christ, and like all kinds of, and I was like, oh, okay, well, then start talking then, so you can get an understanding of the video. So yeah, it was a little bit, it was, you know, of course it is shocking, right? It's kind of not just to shock, but it is there is an element of that bit of shock. And I guess the audience, of course, was also perhaps quite religious, and just, you know, this is Bulawayo. It's a small kind of little beautiful sleepy town where that kind of things, you just don't see it, right? Especially I don't know, you know, the specific body and everything. It was unexpected, I guess. So but it also kind of brings me back to, you know, a later video performance, which was then shown at the National Gallery Zimbabwe in Harare, and it was part of a women's exhibition, right? Women's show, part of Women's Month, and all of those things. And it was kind of like, you know, it's like 3 videos combined together, and really it speaks about, again, a very taboo, in quotations, subjects, which is about women's menstrual health. And again, people were shocked, and they were, I mean, I had like a radio interview with Rejoice, and she was speaking about, you know, how this, she basically has a radio show in Zim, which is quite big, and it talks about all these challenging kind of dialogues that we have to have. And I remember when this work was shown at the gallery, a young girl came up to me and she said, "Why are you exposing us like this?" And I was like, but it's really not about exposing us. It's just about, you know, confronting that this isn't something that we should shy away from. You know, it's like, I think Helena was actually saying, it's like smuggling contraband, you know, like when you ask for, you know, a sanitary pad or something, like, oh, everyone gets all scared. It's like, why? It's such a natural and beautiful process of the human body. It's part of who we are. If we don't have that, we cease to exist. So yeah, it was also quite interesting in that kind of aspect, how, again, and that wasn't, I was covered completely in a white sheet, so you couldn't see the naked body, right? But it was this idea of nakedness, of being exposed, of showing. Yeah.
So I think last chance, if anybody wants to ask a question, raise your hand. Otherwise, yeah. Nomalanga?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm still figuring Zoom out. It's all very interesting. So I'm always so interested in process and how, you know, artists, creators arrive at a body of work. And to some extent, all three of you have spoken about your process. I'm just interested in your intention or your aim when you start a project, when you're working on a body of work. Are you ever attached to the outcome and sort of how people will react or respond or receive the work? Or is it just a commentary and you're happy to just leave it there? Anyone?
Oh, I guess I can.
No, I can.
You can go. Okay, well, I guess it's kind of like, in a way, what I was saying earlier, right? So these works are produced, and yes, there is that idea that it might shock certain viewers, you know, as art would do. Not always the only intention, but I think the whole idea, at least for me, is that it starts a dialogue, and it starts kind of, you know, why are we shying away from this? Or why do we feel a certain way when we see this kind of body in this position, right? So it's like, that's very important. And also, like Candice was saying earlier in the start, like for me, my practice is a lot about silence, or not being able to speak, or not being able to communicate, or having that miscommunication, not only personally, but also I think, you know, from interactions that I've had with people, right? And I think it might be a general kind of, you know, there's always some sort of misunderstanding or miscommunication that happens.
Yeah, for me, I think there's always been an interest of kind of figuring ways of the media itself, or like modes of presentation or representation. Presentation in a sense of like investigating ways of looking, and representation, because like I think as much as like work is shown in different contexts and different audiences, for me at least, it's like a way to rehearse, you know. For example, I mean, performances are kind of rehearsals, you know. Even though we kind of have been preparing for long, for maybe 2 months before performance or whatever film screening, the rehearsal happens through editing. You decide on certain things to show, and you decide on things, how they kind of act up or, you know, appear to the audience. So I think for me, there's been inquiry of understanding ways documentary film or documentary photography or fiction-based film or fiction-based photography has its insistence within narrative or storytelling. I'm thinking in relations to oral histories within indigenous cultures, where the telling of stories has been like happening through sharing, you know, intergenerationally, like, and obviously like translation happens there, you know, things get lost in time. As much as photography and video within those prehistoric contexts are ways to show an event, a specific event or an occurrence of a ritual, if I may say, or certain performances. You know, they are really entangled with the person behind the camera as well, the person outside of the camera, or the person the camera takes the image of. So everybody's like intertwined there, because, you know, of course, with artists and the ideas of authorship, that as an artist, you kind of entitled to, you know, the rights of your work and these kind of things, and it's just only you, you know, being a singular author of that body of work that you're trying to put together. But I feel like there is a collapse with like filmic medium, because film is very collaborative practice. I'm trying to think of it as being that process. I'm saying about like essay film based practices. They are more research based, in a sense that you, of course, you acknowledge your material that you've used, you know, in terms of all the clips and everything else, except in cases where some images or video, they're off copyrights. They've been like more than 30 years or so. So yeah, for me, it's just like a way of like playing around, you know, the ideas of the media itself and the material that the media allows to show, you know, like both the camera image and the person behind the camera, and perhaps the audience that sees the work itself. So it's just ways of reimagining. Yeah, it's just ways of reimagining.
The last thing that I wanted to say with that, with what you were just saying, Phumulani, is this idea of, you know, it kind of comes back to the death of the author, right? Once you publish a writing, once you publish whatever, the video, whatever it might be, it's out in the world, right? And everyone's going to have a different take on it. Whether you want it to have only one specific kind of aspect, it's never going to just have that one specific aspect. And you know, that's with kind of anything that you put out in the world, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel it's a very great thing to happen. Yeah, but I think, yeah, for at least like it is like ways to exercise. It's just exercises that, you know, to kind of, I mean, like allow the audiences to like engage, you know, which I can't necessarily like tell as well, like in relations to people in different situations, and someone, for example, within like a conventional film taste, like taste of like conventional filmmaking, when seeing this essay film, how they would really perceive it, because of course it has these specific nuances that are very specific, within these ways of operation. Yeah, but I think for me, like it is an important aspect of like kind of always thinking about a collaborative process. Especially I think with documentary practices, it's more convenient than with fiction. But obviously, like certain stories come from somewhere, you know. And one thing I wanted to say about like the film was the idea of there was a question that was, I think it's the question from Fred Moulton, who was collaborating with someone else, like what does the sound of technology, how does like technology sound like, what are the sounds of technology? Hence the clip in the film, of course it's a woman, like it's a white woman as well, so most of the sounds of technology are necessarily like, voice of a white woman, like a voice note when you call someone and you can't really reach them, auto teller machines, and these kind of things. So I feel like it's there's a specific obsession. I don't know how it happened, but I'm really interested in that idea of the sounds of technology, like, and ideas of denoising, like taking out noise within that specific sounds. Yeah, but of course, I think it's an important aspect. But obviously, as much as it's the sound of a white woman, as well as other sounds as well, with like feminist, techno-feminist cultures, or I don't know if there is such a thing, but there probably is. Or Black feminist studies, how they would think about the sounds of technology. And then if the sounds of technology is a very interested capitalist obsession, how do we necessarily like disrupt it in a sense, so we can include other voices of women.
I love this dog in the background.
My dog's sitting at the door here to come in. It's a constant. I keep muting it so you can't hear. I suppose if there's no other questions, maybe just a last discussion point before we wrap up. Do you think that, I'm not going to say will coronavirus have an impact on your work, but what do you think it's going to change the art world in any way? If it does, how do you think it will be for the good or for the worse?
I mean, it could make us more insular and appreciate more of our own. And I mean, it's kind of happening on the African continent already. But if I think of like art in Zimbabwe, there aren't that many channels in Zim. So we kind of, like a lot of the good artists don't often show in Zim just because of the institutions. And I mean, there's no art buyers and there's, nothing like that really. Maybe it will make it more kind of community based in a way. I don't know. But to be honest, I don't think it will change much.
I don't really know, but yeah, as much as it's kind of weird to like isolation like happens, you can really self-isolate, despite whether there's a coronavirus or not. I think it's like a self-employed, it's like self-employment, when you are not necessarily like fit for a specific job, like decide to be unemployed. I don't think, yeah, I mean, self-isolation or not, artistic practices still continue. Like artists still post their work online on a day-to-day basis. Of course, there's a sense of disparity within the art world, but I guess the art world also has its footing in relations to speak about like ideas of remote working. Because I think remote work, it's not necessarily, it's probably new as we are feeling it within the coronavirus, but like in other contexts where people don't necessarily have to go to work on a day-to-day basis, they can exercise their everyday practices, go to the shop, fetch kids at school, and obviously, some people are more privileged than others, so I think it's for those who are privileged would necessarily like feels a lot of luxury. Those who are not, like, they are, really pushed in the corner, so I think, yeah, it has its own advantages and disadvantages. And then some people will be more, it will speak more to others than, the majority of people. Definitely the play or the idea of play as well, like kind of happens, we can see it, like we're thinking about specific ways of showing without necessarily being together in one space, which of course, yeah, it's important that it happens just to spread the virus itself. Yeah, but I feel, over time, I feel like they will change in a way, we'll be able to like isolate the virus, and so that it doesn't really affect a lot of people. I think that will be a great thing.
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking what you were saying earlier, Phumulani, about like these little stop motion, videos that you're busy with now, that you were saying, you probably wouldn't have really worked on them if you were still in the studio, right? So it's kind of like it allows for that time in a way, that space, and that's great, right? That's quite exciting. Yeah, I mean, I'm also kind of, I think Neve as well, right? So we live obviously together in this house, and it's like trying to make it work and trying to be like living together and like having a studio together, which is also kind of what happened at the Bag Factory. So I guess it's not too different in that sense, but maybe I've been finding it a bit easier because I've been working online and working from home for over a year now. So it's kind of like, whatever, just carry on, right? It's like, it's just kind of hard to distinguish between, like a Monday and a Tuesday, because Tuesday is when I'll go into studio or whatever, right? So it's like, there's no like, what day is it? I don't know. But yeah, I think it's good. I think it's obviously important, right? This whole kind of disruption, and the whole world is going through it. And I don't know, I've always kind of realized that if things like that, if it never happens, then you don't ever kind of think twice about the way that you live, right? And I don't want to go into the like whole weird vibes, but for instance, like, when Cape Town was running out of water, you all of a sudden realize, okay, shit, this is really precious. We need to actually be aware of what we're doing. And the same in Brixton, right? If there's a power cut, then our water goes off, and then we don't have water for like 2 days. And then it's like, okay, this is real. Like, this is really, a lot of people face this every single day. So of course we are very privileged to have that, and only have to suffer when there's a power cut. But point being is that, these things are important, and we're quite ignorant, and we're just like, whatever, we're just going to do our things, right? So now it's like really almost a wake-up call, I would say, in a way. And we'll have to change, it's not gonna, I don't think it can go back to the way it used to be, or hopefully it won't. It shouldn't.
Well, that's it for me. So thank you so much to the artists, Phumulani, Neville and Olivia, for sharing your work with us, for being on board with this experiment of the Covert Bioscope. yeah, for participating in this conversation.